How financial elites convert crises into generational wealth. What if the moments that broke nations made a handful of families richer than entire governments? What if every recession, every market crash, every sudden emergency you were told was unpredictable, wasn't just predicted but profited from? For over a century, financial elites have mastered a system where chaos is not a threat, but a resource, a tool, a doorway into generational wealth, so durable it survives wars, depressions, and complete monetary collapse. Tonight, we're going to expose how financial elites turn global crises, the same crises that devastate ordinary people, into wealth that lasts for generations, not by luck, not by genius, but through a mechanism hidden in plain sight. A mechanism you're never supposed to see, and to understand it, we need to travel back to a moment when the global economy nearly died, and a small group of men made sure they came out even more powerful than before. The world-changing pattern begins. Every financial crisis has two stories. The public story, panic, fear, collapse, and the private story, preparation, accumulation, opportunity. Behind the headlines, behind political speeches, behind emergency measures, there's a recurring cast of characters: investment banks, central banks, industrial dynasties, political insiders, and institutions that never lose, no matter what the economy does. You'll notice a pattern. When ordinary families lose homes, jobs, savings, financial elites acquire assets, market share, and long-term control. This isn't coincidence, it's design. The Crisis 12 pipeline didn't appear overnight. It was built, brick by brick, through banking laws, influence networks, market manipulation, and one crucial psychological weapon: fear. To see the machine clearly, we start with the crisis that rewired everything: the Great Depression. Origins: the depression that made billionaires in 1929. The global financial system collapsed. Factories closed. Banks failed. Millions were unemployed. People burned their furniture for heat. But in the shadows, something else was happening. While markets crashed 90%, certain banking families and investment houses quietly purchased land, railroads, factories, utility companies, and gold for pennies on the dollar. Not because they were lucky, but because they had prepared for the fall. They had liquid reserves, they had political access, they had insider knowledge of the system's vulnerabilities, and most importantly, they had the ability to survive long enough to buy what others were forced to sell. This is the first pillar of crisis wealth. In a crisis, cash is power, but only if you already have it. Ordinary people lose assets during emergencies. Elites acquire them. The Great Depression didn't erase the old banking dynasties, it made them stronger. Utilities, manufacturing, energy, transportation, entire industries became consolidated under far fewer hands. And for the first time, governments realized something. Crises reshaped the economy more effectively than legislation. Elites realized something too. If you control the crisis, you control the wealth. The pattern was born: the rise, war, Reconstruction, and the new elite playbook. When World War II erupted, the world entered another era of devastation. Cities leveled, economies shattered, currencies destroyed. Yet again, the financial elite were not weakened. They expanded. While nations spilled blood on the battlefield, corporations like IG Farben, General Motors, Standard Oil, Mitsubishi, and Siemens grew through wartime procurement, strategic acquisitions, and guaranteed government contracts. War was chaos for citizens, but for entrenched financial power, it was predictable cash flow. Then came the Reconstruction boom, the Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, institutions created to stabilize the world, but which funneled influence into the hands of global financial architects. Crises became an economic engine with stages: destruction, emergency, loans, asset fire sales, foreign ownership, long-term control. By the 1960s, elites had discovered the most powerful tool yet: debt. Not personal debt, not corporate debt, sovereign debt. Debt that entire countries could never realistically repay but were forced to service forever. Financial crises no longer needed to be natural. They could be engineered. Through currency manipulation, through interest rate shocks, through resource extraction contracts, through controlled inflation. Elites had a playbook, and they used it everywhere from Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia. But it wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s that the Crisis 12 machine became global, unstoppable, and invisible. The breaking point, when crises became profit models. The modern formula for converting crises into wealth crystallized during a series of collapses: the Latin American debt crisis 1982, the Asian financial crisis 1987, the dot-com burst 2000, the dot-com burst 2000, the global housing crash 2008. Different countries, different causes, same winners. In Latin America, huge loans were issued under artificially low interest rates. Then rates skyrocketed, currencies collapsed, countries defaulted. Elites bought national companies, electricity grids, water systems, airlines, banks at 10 to 30% of their value. In Asia, hedge funds and major banks forced currency devaluations, then swooped in to purchase real estate and corporate stock for near zero cost. In 2000, Tech startup valuations crashed 80%. Venture capital firms with deep reserves consolidated the most promising technologies, search engines, infrastructure companies, early cloud systems, shaping the digital economy for the next 2 decades. But nothing compares to 2008. The 2008 wealth transfer, the perfect blueprint. When the U.S. housing market collapsed, 9 million homes were foreclosed, $19 trillion in household wealth evaporated. Unemployment spiked, entire communities were destroyed, but for elites, it was the buying opportunity of the century. BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Blackstone, they acquired millions of distressed homes, entire mortgage portfolios, and failed banks. They didn't survive the crisis. They monetized it. They turned single-family homes into an investment asset class worth trillions. The global financial elite had perfected the system. Create leverage, gives inflate prices, gives trigger collapse, gives buy the rubble, gives profit for decades, but the public never sees the mechanism because the mechanism is protected by complexity, derivatives, debt tranches, bond swaps, asset rehypothecation, central bank liquidity windows, a language specifically designed to obscure what is actually happening. Wealth is not disappearing. It is being transferred from the many to the few. Fallout. How crises create permanent class divides. Every crisis has a cost, but the cost is never paid equally. When markets fall, assets flow upward, ownership concentrates, debt burdens shift downward. Ordinary people lose time, stability, and opportunities they can never reclaim. But elites, they gain assets that generate compounding returns for decades: real estate, commodities, infrastructure, strategic companies, intellectual property, government, bonds. This is how crisis wealth becomes generational wealth. If you own land, transportation, energy, housing, food production, financial services, then market crashes only expand your reach. This explains why the 10 richest people doubled their wealth during the pandemic. Billionaires gained over $5 trillion while 100 million people fell into poverty. The top 1% own more real estate than the entire middle class. 57% of global corporate wealth is controlled by less than 2,000 individuals. Crises are not anomalies. They are wealth accelerators. Why fixes always fails. Every crisis triggers reforms, new regulations, new committees, new watchdogs, but they rarely change the underlying structure because financial elites help write the rules. Lobbying, political donations, regulatory capture. The system depends on debt growth. Without constant borrowing, the global economy collapses. Central banks protect the asset-owning class. Rate cuts, bailouts, liquidity injections all benefit those with assets, not wages. The public demands short-term relief, not structural change, and short-term relief always reinforces long-term elite advantage. The entire architecture is self-reinforcing. Crises concentrate wealth, gives wealth, gains influence, gives influence, shapes policy, gives policy, creates conditions for future crises. A loop perfectly closed. Modern parallels, the cycle continues. Today, the same playbook is visible in pandemic-era wealth transfer, cryptocurrency collapses and acquisitions, AI sector consolidation, housing affordability crises, government-level debt spirals, emerging market currency breakdowns. Look closely at recent data. Private equity firms acquired $250 billion in distressed assets during the pandemic. BlackRock and Blackstone now influence more than $16 trillion in global capital. Central banks bought $9 trillion in assets during emergency programs, inflating the portfolios of the wealthy. Tech giants absorbed hundreds of failing startups during downturns, tightening their monopolies. Every collapse strengthens the architecture, and every recovery deepens the divide. Final takeaways. 3 truths define the crisis to wealth pipeline. Crises don't break the system, they are the system. They redistribute wealth from unstable hands to stable ones. Wealth is not created in chaos, it is transferred during chaos. The rich do not fear volatility. They thrive on it. Generational wealth is built by owning assets that survive cycles, not by riding the wave, but by owning the shore. Closing warnings. As global debt hits record highs, inflation erodes currencies, housing becomes unapproachable, and new financial innovations emerge. Ask yourself who benefits when the next crisis hits, and who pays the price. Because one thing is certain, another crisis is coming and the playbook is already written. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, informative, or even unsettling, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who still believes crises just happen. The truth is hidden in plain sight, and we're going to expose every layer of it. Stay curious, stay aware, and remember, in the world of money, nothing collapses by accident.